So we're talking today about the business life cycle. And when we talk about the business life cycle, that is let me just turn this off, please. That is the progression that a company goes through the growth phase or the scaling phase. And the five stages that they go through are what we call the development or seed stage, the startup stage, the growth survival stage, as you can see on here, the expansion stage, the maturity stage, and there's one other one that I have included in here, which is the decline stage. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get farther into it. But, my personal opinion, and I'm the business growth strategist, so everything I do kind of falls around the growth of a child. So that's where I come from. So you'll hear me talk about, the stages that an adult or a child will go through when I'm talking about this. All right, so what stage do you feel you are in your business right now? As a growth strategist, all right, I can tell you how many times, I can't tell you how many times I have encountered business owners who believe that they're growing even if they have just a 2% increase in sales each year. Yet what's happening is they're losing existing customers and maybe bringing on some other customers that are a little bit larger. That's not really growth. All right. What needs to be taken into consideration is customer retention. Customer retention is one of the primary key performance metrics that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about scaling a business. You want to be able to hold on to those customers and eventually turn them into your advocates on the back end while you're still growing new customers. Alternately, many businesses in the growth stage aren't utilizing their resources efficiently to fuel continued growth or increase profit margins. So as we see here, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the phases. And what I want you to pay attention to are the metrics that we're going to be looking at: your profit margins, your cash, and your sales, because those are critical when you're talking about expanding to the next stage. Okay, and this graph might be a little bit off because I did it very quickly, but we'll continue. Okay, so let's look at each of the stages, tracking them to the life cycle bell. Okay, first let's talk about the seed stage. All right, the seed stage, that is what I call the conception stage. Husband and wife decides that they're going to have a baby. They've got the plans, they conceive the baby, etc. You go through a 9-month process there. All right, what you're doing is you're doing your planning. You're thinking about your business model, the idea that you have. You're excited and you're waiting for that to happen, right? Okay. What's happening is you're running on adrenaline. Your passion is what's driving you forward. You are also, patience is critical during this stage because there's so many things that you need to take into consideration before you birth that business. All right. You need to think about, okay, who are my competitors? What's the market like? Is my product or service offering, is my market large enough to be able to sustain my business? Are my profit margins enough? All of this has to be taken into consideration before you birth the business. That's what we call the prove it stage. All right. So questions you should be answering here are, what does the market need? Where are the gaps in the marketplace? Do any of them fit within my business? Can I provide a solution for those? Okay. Does the idea solve a need? Will the market accept my offer for value? Will I be able to make enough money to support my business? What value would the market offer? Will it fetch the business profit? Okay. For instance, is this a need to have offering or a like to have offering? Does that make sense? Okay. And does the idea have the potential to sustain and grow the business? So this is all part of the seed stage. What business structure will be appropriate to achieve the proposed motive for the business? Is it going to be a sole proprietorship? Is it going to be an LLC, a C Corp, an S Corp? All of those should be answered in the seed stage before you actually birth the business. Now, the startup stage is where the business is birthed. We've all heard the saying, the birth of a business, okay? As a small business owner, most people, just like in birthing a baby, okay, we don't have a playbook that prepares us for that new baby, especially when we're first-time parents. It's the same thing in business. There isn't really a playbook that will guide new business owners step by step. And that's part of what is causing problems with new business owners when they start in a new business. What happens is they go in with so many different ideas, but no structure to what they're growing there. In the startup stage is where we're going to start to build that structure. That's where you're going to find out what you really got into and whether your passion and your drive is going to sustain you into the next stage. All right. You're wearing so many hats. You're thinking that you may not have the skill sets for you to be able to say, if you're not a bookkeeper, but you can't hire a bookkeeper, all right, you feel you need to do it, okay? You make mistakes in that bookkeeping, it's going to cost you additional to have those mistakes fixed, right? So you're better off investing a little bit of money into a professional doing this for you up front. Also, it's an exciting time. Like I said, your passion is moving you forward. Ultimately, if you're in this stage long enough and you're wearing so many hats, you're going to get to the point where you suffer from what I call OPA. Now, what's OPA, you ask? OPA is when you become so overwhelmed that you become paralyzed and you avoid doing anything, hoping it'll either take care of itself or you can take care of it later. Does that sound familiar to any of you? Yes. So we call it suffering from OPA. Some of the challenges that you're going to face in this is limited finances, which we already know, right? You're also going to be saddled with poor staffing. Maybe you might have taken on a partner or someone like that you find very quickly you don't get along with, right? You may be slow and limited access to the market because you're competing against other competitors out there that already have claimed a good part of the market. How do you turn around and claim your desired percentage of the market? And also, you're going to have irregular cash flow due to low turnover or people not being able to pay you or, things like that. How will you solve that cash flow issue? It's great to have an accrual basis as far as, being able to bill on a regular basis, and things like that. But when you have to wait 30, 60, 90 days for that cash and your bills don't wait 30, 60, 90 days, that's one of the first things that are going to throw you into an issue very early on in your business. So the next stage, okay, remember we're talking about our three metrics here, okay? Right here is your startup stage. As you can see, your sales are going, they're following the bell curve, but your profit is low and your cash is very low. This is what we just got done talking about, okay? It's not until you get to that expansion stage that you see a crossover where your cash becomes more prevalent than your profit margins. Okay? So let's move on to the growth survival stage. This is the stage where the business has reached its early growth years. All right? I like to look at it as it's a toddler. They're still feeling their way through. They're making mistakes. They're learning how to walk before they run. That's where you're at right here in the growth stage, all right? This is where the rubber hits the road too, because you do what it takes to remain committed. So what are some of the things, put in the chat if someone doesn't mind doing that. Put in the chat what you think. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Hold on. We'll get it back up there. So put in the chat what you think are some of the ways that you can remain committed to this project when you are so overwhelmed with OPA. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat too, and we'll address them afterwards, okay? So you've begun to create a position within the marketplace. You're starting to get those customers, all right? And your brand is starting to be known at this stage. You've narrowed down your avatar, which is your ideal customer, and your pricing structure, your product service offerings, et cetera. You've become more clear about it. You have a working business model, but is it scalable? You're bringing in business. It's like that business I told you, they're growing by 2% each year, but their business model is not built out. The infrastructure is not there. They have a great product or service that may be selling itself at only 2% a year, but they don't have the infrastructure to support it to keep those customers happy, all right, and to build a tribe of loyal advocates on the back end, all right? Now, before moving on to the expansion stage, which is the next stage, there are many considerations that you have to take into account at this stage. First of all, research. Do your competitive landscape research. Who are your biggest competitors out there? What gaps are in the marketplace? We're getting ready to move into that expansion stage. We're getting ready to take our business at a multiplier of 5, 6, 8, 10, okay? So you want to make sure that you have that infrastructure in place to support that growth. Some of the things that are going to become an issue if you don't do this is within the market, you're going to be competing on price if you don't have a value added that you bring to the table that the other competitors don't. Okay, you don't have that breadth, that infrastructure to support whatever additional sales you have. Your market is changing. Pay attention to the trends, especially right now with COVID. There's so many changes that have happened over the last 24 months that need to be taken into consideration when you're planning for 2022. Primarily around technology, sales, marketing, all of those have been extremely impacted by what's happened with COVID. Technology and innovation changes. Staying on top of all of those are critical when you're talking about an expansion, such as, are you going to need a CRM system? Are you going to need, new machinery if you're in manufacturing? Are you going to need, different types of technology applications, things like that are going to streamline? All of these things have to be taken into consideration. Operational strategies, marketing and sales approaches, before you move into the expansion stage. Now, the expansion stage is what I call the adult stage, okay? You're a full adult, you've gotten your degree, you're ready to move forward, you know it, you know it, and nobody's going to tell you you don't. Unfortunately, that's not the case all the time. Just like anybody who is graduating from college or getting into a new position in a business, there's always things that are going to crop up that you're not expecting. Coming out of college, you may have majored in engineering, and all of a sudden you realize there's no engineering jobs out there. what do? Or you get into a position like I did one time. I used to work in the architectural engineering construction market, and I worked there for 30 years. And I worked myself through every logistical cycle within that market because I needed to know who I was marketing to. And this is a B2B environment here. So I went from the design phase into the construction phase. And when I got over to the construction phase, from the design, they had their systems, their methodologies, everything outlined. It was so easy to work within that environment. But when I went over to the construction side, this is a major global construction management company. They had no systems in place, no processes in place. And I had to respond to public RFPs on very large projects. Each of these RFP responses would take, on average, anybody else, it would take a good, 7 to 10 days to produce these proposals. With me, with the design company, I had been able to get it down to, 2-3 days, but I was immediately with the construction company back to 7 to 10 days because they didn't have the systems in place and things like that. So I had to spend 6 months just putting systems in place so that I could do my job more efficiently. So those are the kind of things that you have to take into consideration when you're in the expansion stage. What can come up that's going to derail your expansion efforts? You also have to look at, how are you going to fund the expansion? Are you going to go for angel funding? Are you going to go for venture capital? Are you going to go for an equity loan with the bank? All of that, needs to be considered because you want to be able to put together your budget, your forecast for expansion for the next 5 years or so that you can effectively get that line of credit or whatever it is that you need for your business to be able to expand at this stage. All right. Perhaps you might want to introduce a new product or service, a virtual or a horizontal product line or service line. That's going to take some time. That's going to take, months for you to facilitate that introduction of that new product or service. But you still need to build it into your strategy, your growth strategy, your scaling strategy. But at this point, you've probably developed a solid brand and have a loyal tribe. So now you've got that steady income coming in on a regular basis, and your sales team are fairly familiar with what they need to do. So it's self-sustaining. A great deal of it is. By the time you've gone through the expansion stage, and you've exhausted all of the new growth avenues that you have done, all right, now you move into what we call the maturity stage. Now, the maturity stage is where I say, we've reached retirement age. And there's several decisions that have to be made here, you have to ask yourself, has my vision been realized, first of all? And this is one thing that's critical to point out is you have to have your big vision from the very beginning at seed stage. You have to know what that vision is. With me, with Marketatomy, my vision ultimately is I want to reduce the number of failed small businesses in the US by a certain percentage. And in order to do that, they have to be educated, they have to be held accountable, and they have to have the resources available to them in order to succeed in business. That's what I bring to the table. So at the maturity stage, I'm going to be asking myself, have I met my vision? And if I have met my vision, do I want to sell? You need to know what your exit strategy is. Am I going to turn it over to my family? Am I going to just let it run its course? What am I going to do? Those are critical questions that need to be answered. Am I going to exit gracefully on top of the bell curve, which is where we are at the maturity stage? Or am I going to take the risk of it going into the downhill and not being able to get the value out of it that I had put into it. So these are questions that you have to take into consideration. The other thing to take into consideration is at the maturity stage, if you make a decision that you want to either sell it or put it out for public, what do they call it? I'm sorry, my brain is, it's 5 o'clock, 5:30 here. If you're going to put it out for sale, okay, at that point, it may take on a new bell cycle. It may take on a new life of its own. And that new buyer will determine what the trajectory is going to be. So with that being said, let me ask you, where are you today in your business? Based on what I've told you, where do you think you are right now in your business? And, you know, Marketatemy has worked with several small, medium companies, especially in this category here, and the 5 phases of growth. And we've worked with technology companies, service-based companies. We've worked with AEC, which is architectural engineering construction companies. We've worked with manufacturing, retail. You know, business is business when it comes to it. Okay, when we're talking about, you know, a business life cycle and the 5 stages of growth, it's going to apply to any type of business. It's just a matter of where that business is at any stage of the life cycle. One of the biggest mistakes that small businesses make is trying to grow too fast. All right. They don't have a solid handle on their accounting or bookkeeping systems. They don't really know what their capacity or threshold levels are at managing the orders, managing, you know, their deliverables. They don't have the systems and processes in place to manage the growth and much, much more. And that's what Marketatemy is here to do, is to help them understand when they're ready to move into either one of these stages, as far as this is concerned. I've put all of my contact information. I'm going to go ahead and close down this, okay? And I put all of my contact information in the chat. And let me see how I can get this back. There we go. I put it all in the chat so that we can see if there's any questions, and I can't see the chat for some reason. So I may need somebody to tell me what the questions are, if there are any.
Yes, we have a few here.
Okay.
Barbara asked the first one, and she said it was when you were talking about when you're starting. Maybe Barbara, do you want to hop on and ask this question? Because it's kind of a two-part.
Sure.
I jumped in the middle where I probably shouldn't have.
Sure. So excellent information here. When you first started out and you were talking about, you know, the startup stage where people get into, you know, get overwhelmed. Would you say that's the time most startups drop and people say it's too much? Is this the point?
Most startups will drop within the actual growth or the first growth stage, the first, not the expansion stage, but the growth stage. They'll begin to fall out on the startup stage. Maybe about 40% of them will, but by the growth stage or the end of the growth stage, you've lost another 30 to 40% of those businesses because they could not manage. You know, by the end of 2 years, you've got a good 75 to 80% of small businesses have failed. Now, my belief is, even though all the reports out there and everything say they fail because of poor financing, poor management, you know, all of this other stuff, my belief is that it's lack of knowledge, not knowing what they don't know, And by bringing this education program, which is marketatemy.academy, bringing this online e-learning environment to these small business owners, we're able to teach them what they need to know in order to maneuver these roadblocks as far as that's concerned. And, it's at a price point that they can afford, so they can't say they can't afford it, or anything like that. But they need that help. We make it so easy to start a business in the US, but not easy to survive in business. Because most of the programs out there do not really start helping small businesses until they reach what we call second stage. And SBA looks at small businesses as any business with 500 employees or less. Those aren't the ones failing. The ones failing are 1 to 10 employees.
So my other question was, is there a time frame typically that you see for each of these stages, or does it depend on the business?
Well, a new business takes on average 18 to 24 months before they start breaking even. Okay, so that first, I would say a good first 6 to 8 months should be spent in the planning process before you even launch that business. Okay, because there's a lot of research that needs to be done. And then contractual issues, things like that. All right. And then the actual startup stage, you're looking at the bulk of that 24 months in the startup stage. Your growth stage will not really start taking place until after that 24-month period. And by that time, then the growth phase may take 3, 4 years, 5 years before you start moving into the expansion stage.
Okay, thank you.
And that's where a lot of small businesses get confused or make that mistake, is they think that they can go from the see it phase straight into the expansion phase or even the growth phase. And they can't do that without having that infrastructure in place to support it.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
There's my chat. It came up.
Yeah. What was a viewer
Anyone else?
setting? Well, Helen had asked, how do you recommend quantifying and driving expansion appropriately when you're in the midst of creating processes to effectively grow?
Well, that's why, that's the chicken and the egg syndrome here. But in all honesty, those systems and processes should be developing as you're doing this, okay? You're not going to sit there and just take time out of your business in order to develop these. As you do what you do for work, you're going to find that, oh yeah, this is eating into too much of my profit or something like that. And you'll start thinking about, okay, how can I streamline this in order to effectively increase my profit margin? There's a lot of tools out there too. For instance, there's CRM tools. One that I use, which is Active Campaign, that you can actually set up autoresponders and things like that. So you don't have to have an admin or do it yourself. You can set up the systems in Active Campaign or MailChimp or Constant Contact or any of those. Those are the kind of systems and processes that you need to be thinking about. The same thing with, say, hiring procedures or, building job descriptions, all of that. Those are all processes and procedures that you need to have in place in order to, effectively be able to maneuver the business, the operations side of the business. Does that answer your question, Helen?
It does help. Thank you. I think the CRM piece is really valuable. And a lot of times you're using that to drive business specifically, but there's a lot of quality data that can be collected from those tools as well. So figuring out how to drive growth and while also creating those processes and data collection methods is sometimes a delicate balance, but it definitely helps paint the picture of what needs done.
Yeah, what I have found with a lot of my clients is one of their biggest complaints is they have these leads and they're not following up with them, okay? Which is critical when you are in business, especially early stages. is you want to be following up on those leads, and you want to be able to recall what the last call was about, or the last meeting was about, or what tasks or action items were assigned at that time. That's where a CRM system really comes in handy, as long as you use it the way it needs to be done. All right. So when I get a new lead or something like that, I immediately put it into my CRM system. And every time I talk to them on the phone, or every time I need to take an action item, do something that I had promised them, not only do I put it in the active campaign, but I put it on my to-do list with a delivery date. That way I know, and it's reminding me on a regular basis. So there's systems that you can put in place that's going to keep you apprised of everything that needs to be done. Mm-hmm. The other thing I use is something called teamwork, because I work more on a project management side with all of my clients. I keep them accountable. You know, I know what's going on with them all the time. And so we use teamwork in order to communicate and share files and things like that. And teamwork helps me stay on track as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever work with people who are getting into a franchise? Is that something, or is a lot of the franchise stuff already done for you?
And that's something we do work together with a lot of these small businesses, because they get into a franchise thinking that everything's going to be done for them.
Right.
But that's not the case. Okay. There are some franchises like McDonald's, or, you know, or Wendy's or something like that, whereas, yes, they have strict franchising guidelines and things like that. But then you get into, say, some of these stay-at-home, these day home care companies, you know, and other franchises. They're franchises, but they pretty much leave it up to you as far as how you're going to market your business and how you're going to get your clients, you know, and things like that. And they have a little bit of back end support, but you still have to look at that as a business. You have a lot of work that you have to do in order to grow your franchise.
Well, do you help people evaluate if a franchise is a good idea, or it could potentially be successful? Because there's so many options out there.
Yes. And on top of it, I do have a very close affiliate partner of mine who is a franchise attorney, and he helps me with a lot of this as well. That's one of the things that I do, is I surround myself with not necessarily employees, but a lot of affiliates that specialize in different areas. That way I'm not having to depend on my knowledge, which I don't know everything. I know enough to be dangerous about a lot of things. Okay. So I rely on my affiliate partners to help me understand, you know, what I really need to understand when I'm working with a client.
So you advise on, for a typical client, you would advise obviously through the entire cycle, but like you were just offering software tips, like PR and marketing. Do you direct people to PR and marketing agencies, that kind of thing as well? I mean, so it's kind of, right. You're like their business development person.
Think of me as, how can I say this? My degrees are marketing, business development, and MIS, which is database design. Okay. So I work with a lot of my customers in developing systems for them based on what their needs are, you know, and things like that. That's where the database design comes in. But I'm not an implementer so much. Okay. What I do is I work with my clients and we come up with the full strategy so that at a certain time, okay, in that planning process, I know, okay, here we are here, and in 3 months, we're going to need to begin the R&D on this new product introduction. So I will back it out and say, okay, in order to launch this new product, we're going to have to look at our marketing timeline. We're going to have to look at our sales timeline. We're going to have to look at all of this stuff, and we will map out the milestones so that as you're growing your business, we're meeting those milestones and making sure all the questions and all the gaps are being filled.
Do you have connections with people who do funding and that kind of thing, investors or that kind of thing?
I do. One of the things that I do with my clients to begin with is I will basically look at them and sit down with them to determine whether they are a viable option and what their options are based on what their credit history is, what the volume of sales are, the valuation of their company, and kind of guide them in the right direction on where to go as far as for that funding. But I have tons of people that have reached out to me that I have developed relationships with that have the money, private money, venture capitalists, angel investors. I just had one very good friend of mine reach out. She's a client of mine. And he reached out to me yesterday and was talking about private money lending that they have for IP. If somebody has IP, or something like that, that they're interested in talking about, private money lending.
Yeah, and Jana said that there's people in the group also in LeadHERship Global that also can help with funding as well, which is
yeah.
I've met a few of those. I was just kind of curious to explore all the different things you're offering. And
I have one more question. What based on your experience, what are one or two pieces of advice you'd give to businesses that are growing or looking to grow that you think are, pitfalls to be aware of?
One of the biggest pitfalls is trying to do everything in a vacuum. Okay. You need to have one or two coaches in your back pocket. One has to be somebody you can just vent to, just to get things off your chest, that type deal. Because as an executive, it's difficult to go to your employees or your spouse or a boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, to talk about issues because it just throws up red flags or it might cause some tension or something like that. So you need to have a coach who is good at turning around your thinking on certain things and playing the devil's advocate, all right? And then at the same time, you need additional, even if it's an advisory board, that you can throw things out at them, marketing ideas, new product, new service ideas, all of that, because trying to do it in a vacuum is where you're going to find yourself so overwhelmed without having that help. And the next thing you know, you're into something that you put thousands of dollars in that was not viable.
Really, really great information. Thank you.